Hi, this eccentric paleontologist's name is Rick Marshall. Many consider him crazy. The scientist, in all seriousness, claims that time vortexes exist, but one single faithful follower is enough for him to make the whole world believe in what he says. A new show is on TV. Paleontologist Rick Marshall, who's releasing a new book about the paradoxical theory about time vortexes, is in the studio. The scientist is confident that they will save humanity from the fossil fuel crisis. According to him, these vortexes are an incredible source of energy. Host Matt Lohr listens to all of this with skepticism. He makes sarcastic remarks, is outright rude to the scientist, and blames him for wasting taxpayers' money. But no one can even imagine that their conversation will end like this. Marshall works at a school. He tells children that their futures depend on subatomic particles and tachyons. According to the scientist, if you create a special device to control these particles, you can travel through space-time funnels. Moreover, Marshall has already constructed such a device, and it is called the tachyon amplifier. But students don't care about his inspirational stories. But there is an adult girl who does not mind listening to them at all. After one of the lessons, a stranger approaches Marshall, introduces herself as Holly, and admits that she admires his work. She wonders why he never completed the tachyon amplifier, but the scientist clearly does not like all of these questions.
Stop. Chasing that theory got me laughed out of mainstream science.
It would seem that the paleontologist doesn't want to return to this project under any circumstances, but Holly still manages to put a worm of doubt in him. She leaves him a 265 million year old piece of ancient rock she found in the desert. The fossil bears the imprint of a modern lighter. Holly asks him to explain how it's even possible and leaves. To his surprise, Marshall realizes that the mark on the rock is from his lighter. Holly visits his office again the next morning. The girl begins apologizing to the scientist, but suddenly notices a device on the table. It's the amplifier that Marshall stayed up all night finishing. However, he did not have the courage to test it in action. So, not understanding fully how the strange device still works, Holly still insists on testing it. She takes Marshall to the very desert where she found the mysterious fossil. There, they meet the owner of an abandoned amusement park, Will, and ask him to take them on a tour of the cave. They go into the depths of the grotto on a small boat. Will tries to entertain the guests with wacky reptilian stories, but they are only interested in one thing, the time vortex. Finally, they record high tachyon activity underwater. Marshall turns on his device to amplify the signal with a resonant wave. And
something's happening.
Will is sure that an earthquake has begun. Holly begins to panic and asks Marshall to turn off the device, but the process cannot be stopped. The boat floats by itself and carries the three to a cliff of a giant waterfall, and then sucks them into the huge funnel. They find themselves on the surface of a huge desert. Marshall sees 3 moons in the sky and a Viking ship nearby. He's sure that they finally reached a place where the past, present, and future converged at one point. But there's one problem. The amplifier got lost somewhere along the way, and it was their only chance to return home. Wanderers are distracted by strange sounds. It turns out that ancient people looking for the Australopithecus are fighting nearby. Will tries to get the great apes to worship him by using a lighter, but it doesn't work. They run away, except for one, the one that was threatened by them, Holly, who worked at the zoo for several years and studied monkeys, quickly hits it off with the ancient man, who introduces himself as Chaka. The men and the Australopithecus have a skirmish, which, however, ends faster than it began. Only a couple of minutes pass when suddenly creepers wrap around their legs, and they find themselves on a tree. But this isn't the worst part. From the distance, they hear the roar of a dinosaur, and Marshall notices an old astronaut suit on the ground. He guesses that the predator's feeder is located here, and they should leave immediately. The scientist invites his companions to join hands and sway from side to side, but this is a very risky plan, to put it mildly. Phew! Now they can run for their lives. But first, take a couple of photos with the predator, otherwise who's gonna believe him?
Stand still, please.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
From a distance, the trio notices that Chaka, who escaped earlier, is crossing the canyon on a narrow bridge. They follow his example and leave the dinosaur on the other side at the last moment. Marshall explains why T-Rexes stop in front of such obstacles. They can't properly assess heights and distance. They have poor vision, and in general, their brains are the size of a walnut. The paleontologist describes so colorfully how dumb the T-Rexes are that even the dinosaur itself seems to understand. Its nostrils flare with rage, and it comes back and jumps over the bridge. At the last second, the trio manage to hide in a small cave. Inside, the companions find unexpected objects, a gramophone, a table, and even the skeletons of 2 soldiers. They set up a base in the cave, and in the evening, Chaka joins them. For the night, Will proposes to force the entrance to the cave with a box, and Marshall begins to argue with him. He says that this will only attract the attention of the T-Rex. After all, his brain is no bigger than a walnut, and he relies solely on base instincts. Suddenly they hear a roar. Looks like the T-Rex is offended again.
It's a walnut.
Their second day in another dimension begins. Marshall's filming another camping video while Will and Chaka are looking for food. But suddenly their morning routine is interrupted by a sudden flash. Holly decides that it's plasma discharge or beta radiation, and Marshall suddenly has a strange vision. He sees an alien asking for help, and firmly decides to respond to the request. Despite Will's protests, the 4 of them set out to find the source of the light. It turns out to be a strange, transparent prism. While they're trying to figure out how this thing works, Chaka gets nervous. He calls out a strange combination of words, but the trio doesn't understand their meaning until it's too late.
Okay.
They have no idea how to defend themselves against these strange lizard men. Sleestacks. Holly tries to fight them off with a belt but has no success. Marshall notices that the belt plate reflects the sun rays. He uses this to build a strange pyramid of light and hides in it. And the most amazing thing is that the Sleestacks don't see them in there. Looking back, they realize that they're in some mysterious space like a black hole. They're standing on what looks like a small ice floe, and nearby lies the creature from Marshall's vision. It introduces itself as an Altrusian Enoch. Enoch says that he's familiar with the works of Marshall and even knows about his debate with the journalist on TV. He calls himself a prisoner and asks a scientist to help free him. The thing is, an insidious villain named Zarn has already enslaved his planet and wants to enslave the Earth with the help of a huge army of Sleestacks. All he needs to do this is an amplifier that will give strength to the crystals. According to Enoch, it is with their help that one can move in space and time.
If you wish to return home, these crystals are the doorway. Your device is the key.
Marshall is inspired like never before. Full of enthusiasm, he creates a mini-map of the area and shares a strategy for finding an amplifier with his associates. Their plans are disrupted by Chaka. He persistently invites his new friends to see something. Australopithecus leads them to a strange place where a bunch of random objects are collected. A Ferris wheel, a ship, a statue of a pharaoh, a telephone booth, and a fragment of a motel. They figure that here, perhaps, is the main entrance to this world. Their theory is immediately confirmed. Nearby, they see the boat on which they sailed here. But as soon as they try to get close to it, an ice cream truck falls from the sky, and a flock of hungry little dinosaurs immediately pounce on it. And while these creatures simply do not notice their presence, it's not so easy to hide from the T-Rex and the Allosaurus. The chase begins. Marshall tells everyone to split up and zigzag to confuse the dinosaurs, but that doesn't help much. And most importantly, it seems that the T-Rex is after Marshall. He does not lag behind him for a second. Only after a long, exhausting hide-and-seek does the scientist manage to set up the dinosaurs against each other and hide in a small garbage dump. There, he notices a bottle of liquid nitrogen and a plan starts forming in his head. Marshall runs to his friends and tells them to charge the catapult standing nearby. At the very last moment, they load a bottle into the catapult, and the body of the frozen Allosaurus explodes, and the friends see that the amplifier has been in its stomach all this time, but they don't even have time to get close to it. The device is immediately carried away by a winged pterodactyl. Marshall falls into despair. He no longer sees the point in searching. Holly scolds him, saying that she flew out of Cambridge because she believed in his theories. All this time, she considered Marshall a man who was ready to endure any attacks for the sake of knowledge. But now, she's disappointed. Evening comes, and Will, Holly, and Chaka are sitting by the fire. It seems that they no longer even have hope that Marshall will come back. But he nevertheless comes to the cave with a banjo, plays a conciliation song for them, and declares that he has changed his mind about giving up. The next morning, the paleontologist wakes up before everyone else and informs them that it's time to find the amplifier. They'll have to climb for hours to the top of the volcano. Companions obediently follow him, and getting closer to the final route, they hear a familiar melody. It turns out that the pterodactyl set up an egg incubator right in the crater of the volcano. And now the accelerator can only be reached by walking on the volcanic glass. Marshall volunteers and successfully reaches the trophy. But just as he's about to turn back, dinosaur chicks suddenly begin to hatch. Holly tells her friend that it's because the music stopped. It calmed them down. Well, there's nothing else left to do.
God, I hope I get it. I hope I get it. How many people does he need?
Operation completed. They go to the motel wreck located in the Desert of Finds to celebrate this success. Chaka gives the men a drink from the fruit of an unknown tree, but they learn about its properties only when everything has already been drunk. It turns out that the juice can cause hallucinations. While the drunk guys are soaking in the pool, Holly takes the amplifier and goes towards some strange sound. In the distance, she sees the portal that's exactly the same as the one in the land of the Sleestacks and enters it. The girl is walking through strange lands full of giant crystals, when suddenly a hologram of Zarn appears in front of her. He says that the Altrusian Enoch escaped from custody. Now he will lead hordes of Sleestacks to wreak havoc in time and space, and no one should trust him. Holly sees Enoch kill Zarn, who now has become a hologram.
The sun. I've got to go more than that.
Friends wake up with a terrible hangover. However, the news that Holly is missing quickly sobers them up, and now they're already wandering through the cave with crystals, and Chaka is sent to perform an important task. In the cave, Will and Marshall become unwitting witnesses to the mating of Sleestacks. They leave shed skin, and the friends decide to use it as camouflage suits. At the lizardmen's lair, Marshall and Will see Holly being tried as a criminal. The scientist cannot remain calm. He immediately gives himself away by screaming and then throws off his suit. As he listens to Holly's verdict, he finally realizes that Enoch has been deceiving them, but now no one will understand it, so there's no time to waste. Well, it wouldn't be complete without a kiss. Despite the temptation to give up on everything, Rick and Holly get away from each other and remember the villain. Friends have to tell Holly the bad news. They sent poor Chaka for Enoch. As soon as they say this, an Altrusian appears on the horizon with a prisoner. Enoch declares that he now has everything to enslave the world. He plans to send an army of Sleestacks to different points in time and space, but start, of course, from Earth. The villain thanks Marshall for his assistance and leaves, leaving him alone with a farewell gift, a T-Rex. But this time, the scientist is no longer running from the dinosaur. He decides that the time has come to face his opponent head-on and sends his friends to wait at the obelisk with crystals. The duel begins, and Marshall decides to start with a trump card. Marshall drops his lighter and the T-Rex steps on it. Holly sees this and finally understands how the very fossil that started it all came to be, and the scientist, meanwhile, can't cope with the enemy. In the end, he grabs a staff left by someone and decides to take a risk. Holly runs out of hiding and tries to reason with the dinosaur. She tells it that no one understood him as well as Marshall, and the future of his family depended only on Marshall. Naturally, the lecture doesn't work. The predator only growls and goes home. The Sleestacks, led by Enoch, are already gathering around the obelisk. Will and Holly decide to fight them off to pay tribute to Marshall. And right when the situation escalates to the maximum, unexpected help arrives. Marshall on the T-Rex. With such an ally, it's easy for the paleontologist to deal with all the soldiers. So how did Marshall manage to get out of the T-Rex's stomach? Believe me, it's better if you don't know. But it's obvious that this experience brought them very close. So much so that they say goodbye like best friends. Friends return to the portal where Enoch is already waiting. Or rather, not waiting at all, for them. A fight ensues and Will drops one of the crystals. The funnel collapses, but Marshall remembers that Holly has a similar crystal around her neck. This trick works, but they need to hurry. Trying to stop them, Enoch captures Will at the very last moment and blackmails Marshall. But then the unexpected happens. Will declares that he found his happiness here, and so he will stay with Chaka.
know what your women look like? I'm here to offer y'all protection and shelter.
With a clear conscience, Marshall and Holly leave him in the company of a new friend and return to an abandoned amusement park. Some time passes and Marshall reappears on Matt Lauer's show. He presents a new book, behaves confidently, and does not react to the host's sarcasm. Here it is, the long-awaited justice. And if you had a tachyon amplifier in your hands, which universe would you go to? Write in the comments below, and don't forget to like the story and click on the bell. We're already preparing new cool stories for you.